Mhm. Dr. Avi, when I read your analysis of interstellar object, I was struck by your courage in considering non-traditional explanations, where the evidence doesn't neatly fit in the existing theories that we have out there. And also, I have observed in your book Extraterrestrial, you discuss about Oumuamua. And I was also very fascinated, a couple of months back, about Oumuamua, and I was studying it. And that's how, I came across your work and I got into your work. What specific characteristics, Dr. Ravi, led you to propose um, that it might be an artificial probe and nothing natural? And how has the scientific community, that's a big one, how has the scientific community responded to that?
Right. So I basically had no agenda, but Oumuamua, which was the first interstellar object to have been discovered from outside the solar system, it showed anomalies. At first, it was cataloged as a comet, and then there was no gas or dust around it, so it was clearly not a comet of the type that we're familiar with, because usually you see a cometary tail extending away from the sun of evaporated ices and some dust around it. There was nothing of that sort. Even when the Spitzer Space Telescope examined it very carefully, there was no evidence that it loses any mass in outgassing the way that comets do. So it was not a comet, but then it exhibited an excess push away from the sun without any mass loss. That is difficult to explain. How do you get a force pushing it away from the sun without it losing mass in the opposite direction towards the sun? And then, in addition to that, the brightness of the object changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And that implied, after a detailed analysis of the variation, it implied the object is flat, at least 10 times longer than it is wide, and just tumbling. And I suggested that it's actually a very thin object that is pushed by reflecting sunlight. And in fact, just 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii, Pan-STARRS, that discovered Oumuamua, discovered another object which was definitely pushed by reflecting sunlight. And the astronomers realized within a month, that was in 2020, the object was given the name 2020 SO. And they realized within a few months that, within a month, that this object is actually human-made. It's a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966, because the spectrum was identical to an alloy, aluminum metal that was on the surface of this object. And so it became clear that it's technological in origin, because we know that we produced it in 1966. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? Why can't it be a technological object similar to 2020 SO, this second object, that was floating in space from another civilization? And then there was a similar incident just on January 2nd this year, 2025, where the Minor Planet Center cataloged a near-Earth asteroid. And then they realized, oh, that one moves along the path of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX. And then they realized that's not a rock, it's not an asteroid, it's a car. And so what I'm saying is that we launched objects to space that are technological, and it's just completely natural for us to imagine that there could be space trash or even functional devices that are entering the solar system from outside, and we are not familiar with how many of them are there, and we should just examine critically whether Oumuamua was one. And unfortunately, the astronomers did not collect enough data to figure it out. So we are left in the mystery of Oumuamua. Now it's too faint for us to observe it. But there was a new object that was discovered just in July 2025 called 3I Atlas by a telescope called Atlas in Chile that is 0.5 meter in size. And this new object appears to be anomalous as well. but for a completely different set of reasons, and I can get into those if you wish.
Hmm. Okay, I mean, my next question is related to Three Eye Atlas. And in my own exploration of anomalies, I have noticed how rare it is for scientists, I mean, like you and a lot other scientists, to publicly challenge, the conventional models that are out
Right,
there. Now, Dr. Avi, you strongly suggest, I mean, based on my observation, you strongly suggest that the interstellar object that we know as Three Eye Atlas might even be a kind of an alien spacecraft. Now, I would want to know what features distinguish it from typical comet, and why do you interpret it as possibly artificial, Dr.
right.
Avi?
So before I address Three Atlas, I should also mention what the conventional thinking is about Oumuamua. And the latest, well, initially, different teams of astronomers argued that it must be a rock of a type that we've never seen before. For example, there was a suggestion of a hydrogen iceberg, or a nitrogen iceberg, or a dust bunny, a collection of dust particles in a very rarefied configuration that is 100 times um, less dense than air, and it's being pushed by reflecting sunlight. All kinds of suggestions that are also speculative, and but the argument was that it's definitely not artificial. It must be natural. And here are examples of natural things that we've never seen before. Now, of course, if you imagine a caveman finding a cell phone, that caveman would say that this object looks like a rock of a type that I've never seen before. I mean, so for them to argue that it must be natural and therefore a rock of a type that we've never seen before is clearly an oxymoron. I mean, because either you understand what it is, or you say all possibilities are on the table because we don't know what it is. And then most recently, there was just in December 2024, there was a new paper of all the experts together saying that Three Eye Atlas was that Oumuamua, one eye Oumuamua, was most likely a dark comet, meaning it was a comet, but we couldn't see the tail. It was invisible. It was made of materials, or it was too dilute for us to see. But the point of the matter, the fact of the matter, is that it had to lose about 10% of its mass. So we should have seen if it was ordinary materials. And moreover, saying something is a dark comet is really uh, inappropriate unless you detect any evaporation from the object, because it's just like going to the zoo and you are an expert on zebras, and you say when you see an elephant, you say it's a zebra without stripes. I mean, that is an oxymoron. Either an animal that doesn't have stripes can be a completely different animal. An elephant is different from a zebra. You can't say that an elephant is a zebra without stripes. And just saying a dark comet, on the one hand, you pretend to know what the object is. You say it's a comet, but then you say, well, I don't see the signature of a comet. So that to me is like cheating. It's not really fair to say that. Because you would say that a spacecraft that maneuvers, behaves like a dark comet, and it's not a comet at all. And how, so I think this is meant to display a sense of we understand this object. It's a comet. It's just a comet of a type that we've never seen before. We don't know what kind of a comet it is, but because we haven't seen the cometary tail. But then how do you know that it's a comet? So this is the way that anomalies are being shoved under the carpet of traditional thinking, and then the astronomers say, "Oh, we debunked. We know that it's a natural object because it's maybe a dark comet. Let's move on. Forget about it." And it's really a cheat. And for them to pretend that as experts on comets, they explain this object as a dark comet, meaning an object that they've never seen before as a comet. How that requires a very conservative mindset, but also a mindset that is not allowing other more imaginative solutions. And it's really unfortunate because before meteors were discovered, it was thought that rocks cannot fall from the sky. And after meteors were discovered in were realized to be rocks falling from the sky in 1803, it became conventional to imagine that there are rocks in the sky. And now the experts insist that everything in the sky is rocks, even though we produce technological objects. So anyway, coming back to 3i Atlas, the anomalies there are quite different. First, it's the size of the object. It looks like the minimum size based on the fact that it needs to be very massive. We see that it's losing mass, very different from Oumuamua. It does lose mass, but it doesn't show any deviation from a path that you would expect based on gravity alone. Oumuamua was deviating. It had some non-gravitational acceleration, and 3i Atlas does not. So that means that it's very massive. And I calculated that it needs to be at least a million times more massive than Oumuamua. And then this is just the third object. So the question is, why haven't we seen a million Oumuamuas before we see this one? How can it be so massive? It's very unusual. That's one anomaly that we wouldn't expect it to be a rock, because there is just not enough mass in interstellar space to deliver such a rock of giant proportions, bigger than 5 kilometers in diameter, comparable to the size of Manhattan Island. Such a rock should be extremely rare. We can't expect it to be delivered to the inner solar system once per decade. So that is one anomaly. And then the second has to do with the fact that it came on a trajectory that was aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun, and within 5 degrees. And the chance of that happening at random is 1 in 500. If you look at the trajectory, it looks like it's perfectly coming along the plane of the planets as if it was on a reconnaissance mission. So the question is, was this path designed by some intelligence? And it also arrives at a very special time that allows it to pass close to Mars, close to Venus, and close to Jupiter. But when it arrives closest to the sun, and that will be on October 29th, 2025, it will actually be on the opposite side from where the Earth is. So we won't be able to see it. When you look at the sky during the daytime in the coming week, you just need to keep in mind that the 3i Atlas is hiding behind the sun. And actually, when it comes closest to the sun, that's the perfect opportunity for a technological object to do a maneuver, because it can take advantage of the gravitational assist by the sun. And that's what we do with spacecraft. And so therefore, we should monitor what happens to it after closest approach. And maybe it was hiding from us on Earth for a reason. And then in addition to the trajectory, there are some anomalies about the object itself that, for example, it shows a glow ahead of it in the direction of the sun rather than behind it, the way that comets do. They have usually the dust that is shed by comets is pushed backwards away from the sun by the radiation pressure from the sunlight. And the gas is pushed behind the object by the solar wind. And for this object, during July and August, we took images, and the Hubble Space Telescope showed very clearly that there is a glow in front of the object towards the sun rather than behind it. And then the composition of the gas that is detected around it is unusual. For example, there is very little water in it, about 4% by mass, according to the Webb telescope data. Also, there is nickel without, a very high abundance of nickel with no detectable iron in some spectra that were taken. And the only place where we see nickel without iron that we know about is in industrially produced nickel alloys, because in nature, in all the comets that we looked in the past, there was comparable amount of nickel and iron. So the question is whether the surface of this object was manufactured technologically, because we produce nickel alloys for aerospace applications. In addition, the direction of arrival of this object was coincident with within 9 degrees with a very anomalous radio signal that was discovered in 1977 called the WOW signal. So the object arrived from a direction where the wow signal arrived to within 9 degrees with a chance of 0.6% of being in the same region. And moreover, there is a very negative polarization coming from this object that was never seen before for other comets. So all kinds of anomalies, and it's difficult to know what to do with them. And I suggest just monitoring the object, getting the best resolution we can of the region around it. And in fact, there was an opportunity when it passed close to Mars on October 2nd, and we used the high-rise camera there on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter there. But NASA is shut down because of the government shutdown in the US, and we haven't seen yet that image that should be better by a factor of 3 in resolution. We should have a pixel size of 30 kilometers from the high-rise camera. But we will have additional opportunities. The JUICE spacecraft that was launched by the European Space Agency will be able to observe 3I Atlas after it passes closest to the sun in the first week of November. And then on March 16, 2026, the Juno spacecraft near Jupiter could observe it. The closest distance that it will ever get to the Earth will be accomplished on December 19th, just a week before Christmas. And that would be also a very good time for ground-based and space-based telescopes to observe it, because it will be after it passed close to the sun. So if it's a regular comet, we might expect much more gas and dust around it, although we haven't seen any clear evidence for dust so far. And if it's not a comet of a type that we're familiar with, then the question is, what is its nature? And especially if it does a maneuver, then I think it will change everything. If we see that it either changes course after passing close to the sun, or it sheds off some mini probes that approach the planets, the stock market may crash.